Time is something we all take for granted, ticking steadily, predictably, without mercy. But what if there were places on Earth where time stops, where seconds stretch into hours, days vanish in moments, and reality itself begins to warp? Tonight, on Real Discoveries, USA, we uncover 5 of the world's most mysterious locations where the normal rules of time no longer apply, and where those who enter may never perceive it the same way again. From villages that vanish from maps to forests that trap travelers in endless loops, these stories are stranger than fiction, yet terrifyingly real. If you dare to explore the unknown and witness the moments that defy logic, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because every story on Real Discoveries USA will take you deeper into the mysteries of our world. And tonight, the clock is about to stop. Let's move to our first place. There is a place hidden deep in the northern wilderness of Siberia, where maps fail and compasses falter. Locals call it the Valley of Eternal Silence, a region so vast and empty that sound itself seems swallowed by the frozen air. The story goes back centuries, told in whispers by hunters and nomads who dared to cross its borders. They claimed that once you entered, time lost its grip. Hours turned into days without notice. The sun seemed to hover in the sky, refusing to move. Watches stopped ticking, and memories blurred into fragments that no one could piece together. Again, at first, it was considered nothing more than folklore, a way to scare children or explain missing hunters who never returned from the tundra. But in 1938, during one of Stalin's expeditions to chart and conquer every inch of Soviet land, a scientific team was dispatched to the region. Their purpose was simple: confirm the myths or dispel them. What they brought back, however, only deepened the mystery and left behind a trail of questions that remain unsolved to this day. The expedition began with 10 men, hardened geologists and surveyors, accustomed to brutal winters and endless miles of emptiness. They set out with sleds, radio equipment, and weeks of supplies. For the first few days, their reports were normal: temperatures, terrain descriptions, mineral findings. Then, suddenly, on the 4th day, transmissions became irregular. The signals carried faint static, as if the air itself was resisting the passage of sound waves. The 5th day brought silence. Not static, not interference, silence. When rescue teams were dispatched weeks later, they found only fragments of the camp, tents shredded, though there were no signs of storms, tools and supplies scattered across the snow as if abandoned footprints stretched out into the distance, all moving in the same direction. But after 100 yards, they simply stopped, vanished into the unbroken frost. No bodies were ever recovered. What makes this story terrifying is not only the loss of life, but the details whispered by a single survivor. Yes, against all odds, one man stumbled back to civilization nearly a month later. His name was Pavel Grigoriev, a 34-year-old surveyor, and his testimony remains one of the strangest documents in Russian archives. Pavel described days without nightfall, the sun stuck at the horizon as though refusing to set, shadows elongated unnaturally, stretching across miles. He spoke of an oppressive silence, so absolute that even their own voices seemed muted, as though swallowed before reaching the ear. The most disturbing detail he shared was about time. Pavel claimed they could no longer tell how long they had been walking, sleeping, or eating. Watches froze on their wrists, refusing to tick forward. Some men aged rapidly before his eyes' hair, turning white, skin sagging within days. Others seemed unaffected, their features remaining as youthful as when they began. He confessed that one night, or what felt like a night, they saw figures watching from the ridges. Not animals, not men. Tall, thin silhouettes, unmoving, staring endlessly, as if waiting for something. By the time Pavel was found staggering near a settlement, frostbitten and delirious, he had no memory of how he had escaped. His account was dismissed by authorities as hallucinations caused by hunger and exposure. Yet his words were carefully locked away, classified for decades. But the valley did not stay hidden. In the 1960s, satellite imaging revealed anomalies in the region, shadows that shifted unnaturally, and terrain features that appeared in one photograph only to vanish in the next. Unexplained magnetic readings forced pilots to divert around the area. It was as if reality itself was unstable there, fluctuating between existence and void. Those brave or foolish enough to venture near tell eerily similar stories. Hunters speak of hours vanishing, of going out at sunrise and returning to find entire days had passed. Hikers recall finding the sun frozen overhead, their shadows pointing in the same direction for what felt like eternity. And most disturbing of all, there are rumors of travelers returning decades later, unchanged, still wearing the same clothes, their eyes vacant, as if trapped in a loop where only their bodies escaped. The Valley of Eternal Silence has never been officially marked on maps, but those who live closest to it avoid it with reverence, as though it were a holy place corrupted. They believe it is cursed ground, a fracture in the natural order where time bleeds into itself. Some whisper it is a doorway, a threshold to something beyond human comprehension. Others claim it is punishment, a scar left behind from an ancient cataclysm long forgotten. One hunter, a man in his 70s, once told an interviewer, "When you stand there, it is not quiet. It is absence, no birds, no wind, no sound of your own breath. You feel as though the world has stopped, and you are the only thing left alive." His voice trembled as he recalled walking into the mist and seeing himself, his own figure, walking ahead in the distance, copying his movements with a delay of seconds. He turned back that day and swore never to go again. What unsettles researchers today is that every testimony shares that single, haunting detail: silence so absolute that it feels alive. Psychologists argue it is sensory deprivation amplified by fear. Physicists suggest geomagnetic anomalies interfering with brain function, but none of those explanations account for the watches frozen in time, or the men who vanished without trace, their footprints simply ceasing mid-step, as if erased from existence. And so the valley remains uncharted, avoided, left to its endless stillness. Governments have since restricted flights over the area, claiming safety concerns, though no official explanation has ever been given. On rare occasions, hikers vanish after straying too far into the wilderness, their remains never recovered. Locals shrugged and muttered the same warning they've carried for generations: do not go where time has died. Let's move to our second place. The village, where the clocks never ticked time, is something we live by. The steady ticking of clocks, the rising and setting of the sun, the rhythm that guides our days. But what happens in a place where time itself refuses to move, where the concept of minutes and hours breaks apart, and people live in a constant twilight between reality and nightmare? This is the unsettling truth about a small, isolated village deep in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, whispered about by locals but never officially mapped. Some call it Ceasefar, which roughly translates to the place without clocks. To outsiders, it's a folktale, a story told to frighten children about wandering too far into the mountains. But for those who have stumbled upon its cracked stone paths and crooked wooden homes, it is a place where time doesn't simply slow, it stops. It began, as most forgotten legends do, with a traveler's mistake. In the autumn of 1972, a young historian named Adrian Voicu, from Bucharest, set out to collect folklore for his doctoral thesis. He had been told about remote mountain villages that still practiced pre-Christian rituals, places where the modern world had barely left a footprint. His journey led him deep into the Carpathians, where roads turned to dirt tracks, then too little more than goat paths winding into the fog, after days of walking and sleeping in barns offered by suspicious shepherds. Adrian stumbled upon something strange, an old, hand-carved wooden sign at the edge of a forest clearing. The letters were faded, gnawed by centuries of wind and rain. But he made them out. CEASFR. Intrigued, he pressed forward. But almost immediately, he noticed something was wrong. His wristwatch, a sturdy Soviet-made Raketa, had stopped ticking. At first, he thought the cold air had frozen its gears, but when he tapped it, the hands shifted slightly, then froze again. The same happened with his pocket watch. The second hand quivered, but would not advance. At that moment Adrian should have turned back, but curiosity, the historian's greatest flaw, pulled him deeper. The village appeared through the fog like something out of a fever dream. Wooden cottages leaned at odd angles, their roofs sagging with moss and rot, yet smoke rose steadily from chimneys. The cobblestone path was uneven, as though laid by many hands at different times, patched and repaired without logic. What unsettled him most was the silence. No barking dogs, no children laughing, no wind through the trees, only the hollow crunch of his boots against the stones. And then he saw them, villagers standing still in doorways and at windows, staring. Their faces were pale, their clothes old-fashioned heavy wool coats, aprons, scarves, garments that seemed decades behind the times. They did not wave or smile. They simply watched him with eyes that looked too heavy, as if they had not blinked. In hours. Adrian approached an older man who stood near the well at the center of the square. His face was deeply lined, his beard white and tangled. "Good day," Adrian offered, his breath clouding in the chill. The man tilted his head, as if considering the words, and finally whispered, "Time does not belong here." Before Adrian could respond, a woman's voice drifted from one of the cottages. "Come in, traveler. You should not linger in the open." He was welcomed into a dimly lit house where an old woman stirred a pot of broth over a fire that burned strangely low, the flames curling slowly as if reluctant to rise. She introduced herself as Alina. Her manner was kind, but her hands trembled as she set a bowl before him. "You came from outside," she said quietly. "That means the clocks still run for you." Adrian asked her what she meant, and she gave a tired, sad smile. "You are in Ceasefar. Here, the clocks do not tick. The sun does not rise or set as it should. We live in between moments." He laughed nervously, assuming it was folklore, but as he tried to eat, he realized something unsettling. The broth was warm when he lifted the spoon, but by the time it reached his lips, it was lukewarm. The bread beside the bowl crumbled into dust between bites. Even food seemed caught in strange decay. Alina lowered her voice. "We cannot leave. None of us can." Over the next few days, Adrian tried to record his observations. He sketched the crooked houses, wrote notes about the villagers' clothing, and recorded scraps of their language in his notebook. But every night, when he reviewed what he had written, something was wrong. The ink on the pages had smeared into blots. His handwriting appeared slower, stretched, as if the words had been dragged across the page by time, itself refusing to let them form. And the people never changed. The old man by the well was still there, every day, staring into the bucket of water, as though waiting for something to move. Children stood in the same spot in the square, never playing, never speaking, just watching. The only voice that broke the silence was Alina's, urging him each night to stay inside once the fog grew thick, because when the fog came, he heard them. The first night it happened, Adrian lay in bed, unable to sleep, staring at the flickering candlelight. The silence was so complete, it pressed against his skull. Then, faintly, from outside, he heard whispers, not one, but many, like dozens of voices speaking at once, overlapping, murmuring in a language he couldn't understand. He rose and peeked through the warped shutters. Shapes moved in the fog, tall, too tall for any man. They drifted slowly, as though their limbs were stretched by invisible hands. Their heads turned unnaturally, pivoting too far to the side, searching. They did not walk, they glided, and when they passed, The wooden fences and stone walls around them seemed to bend, as if reality itself warped in their presence. Adrian stumbled back, heart pounding. He clutched his notebook, writing furiously by candlelight. There are things here that do not belong to time. By the fourth day, his mind began to slip. He realized he had not seen the sun rise or set since he arrived. The sky remained locked in a permanent gray dusk. His watch remained frozen, its hand stubbornly stuck. Hunger gnawed at him, but food dissolved in his mouth like ashes. Sleep offered no rest. His dreams were filled with whispers and shadows that leaned too close. Finally, he told Alina he wanted to leave. She shook her head. You can try, but the path will not lead you where you think. Ignoring her warning, Adrian gathered his belongings and retraced his steps out of the village. For hours, he walked the same trail, through the same mist, past the same bent trees. And then, when the fog parted, he stood once again before the sign that read CEASFR. He had gone in a circle. The villagers grew restless when he returned. This time, some approached him, their pale faces drawn tight with hunger and despair. One of them, a young woman no older than 20, grabbed his arm. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. They watch us, she whispered. Every night. They keep us here. They feed on the minutes we no longer live. Her grip was icy, and Adrian pulled away. But her words echoed in his head. Feed on the minutes. He began to notice it then. The shadows in the fog lingered longer. Near the village. When he looked too closely, he swore he saw faces stretched unnaturally thin. Mouths opening and closing in silence, as if swallowing time itself. Weeks later, or was it days, Adrian's notes became incoherent. What little survived from his journal was found years later in a private collection, smuggled out of Romania under mysterious circumstances. The last entry, smeared and almost unreadable, contained only one line: they have no clocks, because they do not need them. Time itself is their feast. Travelers who venture into that part of the Carpathians today report strange phenomena: compasses spinning, watches stopping, GPS devices failing. Some speak of hearing whispers in the fog, voices calling them by name. And though no official records acknowledge Ceasfar's existence, the legend remains. A village where the sun does not move. A people trapped in eternal twilight and shadows that feed on every moment, lost. This is the place where time does not tick, the village forever caught in the hunger of silence. Let's move to our third place. Deep within the Finnish wilderness lies a stretch of forest so old and untouched that locals refuse to enter after dusk. They call it Aika-Metspi, the forest of time. To most it appears like any other forest. Ancient pines rising high, moss blanketing every stone, and a damp silence that presses down on those who dare step inside. But those who wander too far soon notice something unsettling. The sound of their own footsteps lingers unnaturally, echoing long after they've stopped moving, as if the forest itself is replaying the sound. People whisper that those echoes aren't just sound, but fragments of time itself, repeating, replaying, and sometimes answering back. The first written mention of Aika-Metspi comes from a monk in the 1500s, who described a place where the forest memorizes the lives of men. His journal tells of travelers who never returned, and others who stumbled out days later, their hair grayer, their faces aged, unable to speak of what they saw. For centuries, locals have treated the forest as cursed ground. Hunters avoid it. Children are warned never to play near it. Even cartographers have been known to intentionally leave it unmarked, as though to erase it from the world's memory. And yet, stories still seep out. One of the most disturbing accounts comes from a Finnish soldier in the 1940s. His name was Ilmari, a man who served during the chaos of World War II. His platoon had been scattered after a skirmish near the Russian border, and he wandered into Aika-Metspi, seeking cover. He wrote in his final diary entry, found years later that the forest walked with him. His words were uneven, frantic, but one passage has haunted historians. My boots fall, but so too do dozens of others, all around me, in every direction. They match me at first, then they do not. I run, and I hear myself running. I stop, and the sound continues. And then, I realize, I am following footsteps that are not mine, and they are leading me deeper. Ilmari was never seen again. His diary was discovered near a moss-covered rock, pages stiff from dampness. No one knows how long it had sat there. Some pages were smudged, as though hands other than his had tried to write, leaving streaks in half-formed words. Over the years, hikers and researchers have tested the forest with recording equipment, hoping to explain the phenomena. Every microphone captures the same anomaly, footsteps that loop endlessly, even after the person leaves. In one infamous case, an investigator set up a recorder on a stump and walked away, clapping his hands to mark distance. Hours later, when he returned for the recorder, the audio revealed not just his footsteps, but several others following closely behind, overlapping, circling, some heavier, some lighter, some impossibly slow. What unsettled him most was that, at one point the sound of clapping repeated, but he swore he had only clapped once. But the strangest part isn't just the repetition, it's the divergence. People claim that the echoes eventually stop mimicking you and begin wandering off into the forest, as if your past actions have become entities of their own, replaying independent of you. More than one hiker has admitted chasing the sound of their own boots, believing it to be another person ahead, only to realize they had been following themselves, or something that remembered them. A particularly chilling account surfaced in the 1980s, when a group of university students dared one another to spend the night inside ICA Metsby. They entered at dusk, laughing, drinking, and mocking the old legends, but only two stumbled out by dawn. Both survivors were incoherent, muttering about themselves in the trees. When pressed by police, one student broke down sobbing, repeating over and over, "They were wearing my face." The authorities found no trace of the missing friends, only scattered belongings, a torn scarf, a flashlight with the bulb shattered, and 3 sets of footprints in the mud that continued in circles, endlessly looping. Even more disturbing are stories from the few who claimed to have returned after vanishing. In 1997, a man named Elias was found wandering along a rural highway, dehydrated and incoherent. His ID placed him as a forestry worker who had gone missing in 1965, 32 years earlier. He had not aged a day beyond his 20s. When questioned, he insisted he had only been gone a few hours. He described hearing footsteps all around him, chasing voices that called his name in perfect replicas of his own voice. "The forest remembers," he muttered, before disappearing again during his hospital stay. Security cameras captured nothing. One frame he was lying in bed. The next, the bed was empty. Some scientists have attempted to dismiss the phenomena as auditory illusions caused by the terrain, sound bouncing off the dense pines. But even skeptics falter when presented with the tapes. One audio file, preserved in Helsinki, records 39 minutes of silence, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps approaching the microphone. What horrifies listeners most is the sound of breathing, heavy, ragged, distinctly human. But no one was present. The forest was empty. In folklore, the forest is said to contain a keeper, an old crone, a spirit of time itself, wandering endlessly between trees. Some legends say she steals moments from wanderers, feeding on their years, which explains why some emerge aged while others return unchanged. Witnesses who claim to have seen her describe a woman in black, her face hidden beneath tangled hair, her feet leaving no impression in the moss. Most terrifying of all, they say she does not walk alone. Behind her, dozens of echoes follow ghostly figures who move like shadows of the living, their footsteps falling slightly out of sync, as if belonging to another timeline. One particularly horrifying tale comes from a logger named Petri. In 2004, he ventured into the edges of Akametsby to survey land. His testimony was later recorded after he barely managed to crawl out. Broken, pale, his hair streaked white despite his youth. He said he had followed what he thought were his own tracks, back toward safety. But soon he realized the prints were not identical. They were slightly larger, slightly deeper, as if some heavier version of himself had walked just ahead, and then he heard it, his own voice calling for help deeper in the forest. Against his better judgment, he followed. When he finally saw the source, he claimed he saw himself, his double, ragged, terrified, sprinting between the trees. And behind that figure, another double, and another. Each version of him repeating slightly different actions, splitting off like cracks in glass. The last thing he remembered was collapsing, overwhelmed by hundreds of his own voices echoing in all directions. Begging, screaming, and sobbing, Petteri survived, but he never returned to the woods. His final warning was chilling. The forest doesn't just remember you, it makes more of you. And one day, one of those copies walks out instead of you. The forest remains unmarked on official maps, though satellite imagery shows a stretch of unnaturally dense woodland, a blotch of green darker than the rest. Those who live nearby say you can hear it on quiet nights, if the wind carries just right, the sound of footsteps walking endlessly, circling the earth, as though time itself is caught in their rhythm. And so, Akametsby sits untouched, a prison of echoes, a graveyard of moments stolen. Step too far inside, and perhaps you never return. Or worse, perhaps you do, but it isn't really you. Let's move to our fourth place. There is a stretch of land in the deserts of Iran, a place whispered of in hushed voices by travelers, and feared by nomads who will never cross it. They call it Dashti Gorge, the valley where shadows don't move. Some maps mark it vaguely as part of the great Dashti Lut Desert, but those who know of its cursed grounds say it is far older than the desert itself. Here, the sun rises, but shadows do not shift. Time itself bends into something wrong. Those who wander too deep are never the same when they return, if they return at all. I first heard of this valley through an archaeologist named Farid Azami. He had worked for Tehran University and spent years cataloging ruins across Iran's forgotten deserts. But when he told me of Dashti Gorge, his voice shook. He spoke not as a man fascinated by discovery, but as one marked by terror. He said he had gone there once in his youth, with a team of students, following the trail of an ancient caravan road that vanished into nothingness. What he found was not a ruin, not a settlement, but a place where reality seemed to fracture. His story begins with silence. The desert is usually alive with wind, but as he and his team stepped deeper into the valley, the air became unnaturally still. Their shadows, long and sharp under the morning sun, froze in place. No matter how they moved, no matter which direction they turned, their shadows remained fixed, as though painted onto the earth. They thought at first it was some natural illusion, perhaps a trick of the light on the baked desert ground. But then the sun shifted higher, and their shadows did not. Frid recalled the fear that crept into his chest, a primal fear he could not explain. One of the students began to laugh nervously, waving his arms in circles, trying to force his shadow to follow. It did not move. Instead, another shadow, slightly behind his, did, as though something else stood just a fraction of a second out of sync, mimicking him imperfectly. The team pressed forward, documenting everything. Their cameras, however, refused to record. The film developed blank, and their audio reels contained only static and faint whispers that none of them recognized. Still, they pressed deeper into Dashti Gorge, searching for some kind of landmark or structure. Farid described the air as thick, as though it resisted every breath. Time also began to lose meaning. Their watches slowed, and when they checked them against each other, each showed a different hour, Minutes stretched into hours. Hours collapsed into seconds. One student swore they had been walking for days without stopping, yet the sun remained suspended in the same place in the sky. It was then that they found the ruins. Stone pillars half buried in the sand, carved with inscriptions older than any known Persian script. The carvings depicted figures without faces, only long shadows stretching beneath them. At the base of the pillars were dozens of human footprints fossilized into the rock, all of them pointing inward, toward a central circle worn into the ground. They decided to camp there, though Farid admitted every instinct screamed at him not to. The longer they stayed, the worse the distortions became. One student disappeared during the night, though no one heard him leave. His bedroll was empty, his belongings untouched. In the sand nearby, however, there were footprints not leading away, but circling endlessly, as though the student had walked in loops until he dissolved into nothing. Another student went mad. He screamed that his shadow was speaking to him, that it wanted him to step inside it. He tore at his skin, trying to peel away the darkness that was eating him. They had to restrain him, though by morning he was gone too, his restraints lying slack in the sand. Farid and the last two survivors fled the valley. They ran without stopping, driven by a terror that grew stronger with every step. The sun burned above, their shadows still frozen in place, until at last, near collapse, they stumbled out of Dashti Gorger and back into the normal desert. The wind returned. Their shadows moved again, but the valley was still behind them, waiting. Farid told me that, years later, when he looked at the faces of his students in old photographs, he sometimes saw something strange. Their shadows didn't look right. They were blurred, as though someone else had been standing behind them, pressed tightly against their backs. He drank heavily in his final years, and before he died, he left behind a notebook filled with scrawled warnings. Shadows are not ours. They belong to the valley, and one day, they will call us back. The locals believe Dashti Gorger is a fracture in the world, a wound where time bleeds into itself. Some say it was the site of an ancient ritual where men tried to stop the sun, to hold it still so they could escape death. Instead, they cursed themselves, forever frozen between seconds. Modern expeditions have tried to confirm the valley's existence. Some scientists claim it's nothing but superstition, that strange heat refractions in the desert create optical illusions, but others who go searching either vanish without a trace or return shaken, unwilling to speak. One Iranian pilot flying over the desert reported that his instruments went haywire when he passed above a certain stretch of land. His compass spun wildly, his clock lost 20 minutes, and the camera on his dashboard showed only a blank gray haze. He swore he saw shadows on the ground where no men stood. Stretching miles across the desert floor, the truth of Dashti Gorger may never be proven, but one thing is certain: time does not flow the same there. Shadows do not obey, and those who cross into its silence often find that they cannot truly leave, for part of them always remains behind, circling in the sand, waiting for the rest to return. So when you hear the phrase, "a place where time stands still," know this: it is not always peaceful. Sometimes, time freezes, because it is broken, and in the cracks of broken time, something else waits, watching. Let's move to our fifth place. The island that shouldn't exist there is a tiny island in the Pacific Ocean that does not appear on most maps. Sailors whisper about it in hushed tones, and old navigation logs refer to it only as Itna. What makes this island terrifying is not its isolation, nor its rugged cliffs, nor the way storms endlessly circle it. It is the sense that time itself behaves differently there. Travelers who approach its shores often speak of days blending into nights, of hours stretching infinitely, or collapsing into nothing, and sometimes, the island seems to appear when no one is looking for it, only to vanish again as mysteriously as it came. The first documented encounter comes from a Japanese merchant ship in 1883, Captain Hoshino noted in his log that a fog rolled over the vessel, thick and unnatural, and when it cleared, an island appeared on no previous chart. Eager for trade, or perhaps out of curiosity, he anchored. Sailors went ashore and found the remnants of a village huts in disrepair. Tools rusted beyond recognition, and what appeared to be human skeletons scattered along the beach. Oddly, there was no sign of rot, no smell of decay, and the remains were arranged in almost ritualistic patterns. When Hoshino returned to the ship, he found that the day he had spent on the island lasted mere hours, according to the ship's log, but the sun had moved far across the sky, and his crew insisted that they had been gone for days. Confused and terrified, they sailed away, but when other ships passed through the same coordinates later, no island appeared. The next account comes from a modern expedition in 1978, led by an oceanographer named Dr. Naomi Kuroda. She and her team had been tracking unusual oceanic patterns when their sonar detected landmass rising sharply from the deep. Navigational instruments became erratic, compasses spinning uncontrollably, and GPS readings fluctuated wildly. When the team finally sighted the island, it appeared almost perfectly symmetrical from every angle. A geometric impossibility for a natural formation. The crew made landfall cautiously. The sand was white and strangely warm, despite an overcast sky. Trees lined the edges of the island, but their leaves were blackened, brittle, and impossible to rustle. Every sound seemed muffled, distorted, as if the air itself absorbed noise. Naomi described the silence as thick, heavy, and suffocating, like swimming through invisible water. Exploration revealed what seemed to be buildings, long rectangular structures of stone, no windows, only narrow doorways. Inside, they found objects that looked like furniture, books, and clothing, but nothing made sense. The clothing appeared centuries old, yet unworn. The books were written in languages that did not exist. Dust settled in patterns that suggested recent use, yet the air was untouched. Time anomalies became more pronounced as the team spent hours on the island. Watches froze. Cameras refused to record movement. Even thought itself felt distorted. One member described forgetting words mid-sentence, only to recall entire paragraphs that had never been spoken. They discovered skeletal remains, scattered, like the 19th century accounts. Yet when they returned to the beach, the tide had shifted oddly, erasing all footprints. One night, Dr. Kuroda woke to find a figure standing at the edge of camp. It was human-shaped, tall and thin, with dark, hollow eyes. It did not move, but she felt its gaze following her. The team's lights flickered when she pointed her flashlight, and when she blinked, the figure was gone. Other members reported seeing similar apparitions, pale shadows standing in doorways, between trees, or reflected in pools of water. They described the air becoming icy near the figures, the sound of whispers just beyond comprehension. The island seemed to feed on perception. When the crew split to explore different areas, each person experienced distorted time differently. One walked in circles for what seemed like hours, only to return to the same tree repeatedly. Another fell asleep and awoke to find a full day had passed, though the sun barely moved. Days stretched into nights without sequence, and the island's oppressive silence made it impossible to track the passage of time. Eventually, members of the expedition became erratic. One, obsessed with cataloging objects, began carving strange symbols into the trees and rocks, claiming the island demanded it. Another refused to eat, claiming food had no taste or substance. Naomi herself recorded moments where she could not remember her own name, staring into reflections in black pools of water and seeing someone else's face. By the fourth day, the team was fractured. Arguments erupted over navigation and leadership. Compass readings were useless. The ocean beyond the island seemed to shift, showing waves that moved sideways or backward. When the crew tried to row back to their ship, they found it farther than it should have been. Naomi wrote in her journal, "I think the island moves, or we do, or both, or none. I do not know anymore." The most terrifying discovery came when Naomi found a shallow cave at the island's center. Inside, walls were etched with carvings of human figures encased in geometric shapes, all linked by lines and spirals. There were dozens of these figures, overlapping as if drawn in motion, one body repeating endlessly along a spiral path, limbs elongating unnaturally. At the cave's far end, a pool of water reflected the sky, but Naomi saw not her reflection. Instead, she saw dozens of her own faces, screaming silently, eyes wide, frozen in impossible expressions. A scream broke the silence. One crew member had vanished, leaving only the carved shapes on the wall that mirrored his movements exactly. The carvings seemed to extend and animate themselves, as if the island was recording them. Every attempt to leave resulted in disorientation. Paths curved back into themselves. Trees appeared where they had not been. Ocean waves shifted to push them inland. Naomi's journal entries grow fragmented here, alternating between coherent sentences and incomprehensible symbols. The last entry, barely legible, reads, "Do not come here. The island is not alive. It is time, and time is hungry." The few ships that reported passing near these coordinates in subsequent decades described a phantom island appearing suddenly, then disappearing without warning. Modern satellites detect only deep ocean, yet occasionally log anomalies, landmass, shadows, or changes in temperature that defy explanation. Local folklore from nearby islands tells of spirits trapped on Eterna, forever repeating actions, forever unable to leave. Some sailors swear they can hear the faint echo of distant voices carried by the wind, laughter, crying, shouting, all slightly delayed, as though trapped in a loop. Eterna is a place without consistency, a scar on the ocean where reality itself refuses to obey its own rules. Ships vanish there. Explorers vanish there. Time bends there. And those who venture too close sometimes return, but not as themselves. They return altered, speaking in strange rhythms, staring as if seeing something just beyond vision. Some vanish after days, some years. Some live out their natural lifespans, yet always report glimpses of another version of themselves, standing still, waiting, recording, observing. And so, Eterna remains, uncharted and unspeakably dangerous. A phantom island that should not exist, where time, reality, and life itself are merely suggestions, and something unseen waits for each visitor to step ashore.